Welcome to the Fancy Comma YouTube. Today, I'm lucky to speak with Dr. Bruce Kirchoff, a scientist, improviser, and storyteller. He teaches young scientists to speak clearly and intelligibly about their research. His book, Presenting Science Concisely, draws on the relation between the scientific process and the story structure to present science with impact. Welcome, Dr. Kirchoff. It's an honor to have you here because you're probably one of the first people I learned about when I was getting into science communication, and I have read Presenting Science Concisely, and we've reviewed it on the Fancy Comma blog, which I will link to that in the description box. And you actually, relevant to the topic of science communication curriculums, you have several free resources available for students. You are, as well as being like a researcher in the sciences, you also are a science communications educator. So and your approach to science communication is to teach students to give better technical talks, and you don't teach them to talk to the public right away. Why is that?
First of all, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have a chance to talk to you. As you say, my approach is meant to address all graduate students. All graduate students have an interest of giving better talks, giving talks that their audience, oftentimes a technical audience, can understand clearly. Their career is going to depend on this. They're going to depend on the career is going to depend on whether they can get good grants, which means good communication, whether they can present a good seminar, which means good communication, whether they can teach well, which means good communication. All aspects of their career are going to depend on good communication, and every graduate student should be concerned about that. And yet very few get any kind of training in it. I also think that if we're going to solve the problem of communication with the public, we really have to get everyone, all graduate students out there talking to the public in some way, at least comfortable with talking to the public. And I don't necessarily mean giving seminars to the public or trying to communicate information to the public in that way. I just mean that when they meet someone outside of their academic work and they're talking to them on the street, they should be able to say something intelligible to them about what they do for their work, something that would interest that person. I think the public's got a very strong interest in science, and that interest is even stronger if it's coming through a person who is presenting the information in a personal way. Here's the research that I was doing. Here's why it's important to me. Here's why I think it's cool and stuff with that enthusiasm. I mean, if we had every graduate, just imagine, every graduate student was out there just talking to one or two people, it would make a really big difference. And I really think that's the way to address the problem with scientific communication in our communities, in our society. It's a very long process, not under any illusions that this is a quick fix for things. But every societal change has taken a very long time, and so we should be working on it now. And so the first step of that is for students to work on things that they care about. They care about giving good talks at their seminars when they go to a scientific meeting. They care about getting money from grants as they get along in their career. So they care about good communication. So let's address those kinds of things. That's what I really think should be the starting point and where I try to work.
You talk a lot about storytelling, and I think in Presenting Science Concisely, which I read at a Starbucks very quickly, I skimmed it at Starbucks, and you talk a lot about storytelling. The and, but, therefore model provides concrete examples of communicating science as a scientist, like poster presentations. You talk a lot about storytelling, and actually that's influenced a lot of fancy commas like me, because I read your book. I learned how to do SciComm better. Why is storytelling so relevant to scientific communication?
Well, I think there's two reasons. And the first and the easiest reason for a scientist to understand, I think, is that the story structure, classic story structure, mirrors the scientific process. So a story starts out in a world that has certain kinds of characteristics. And that's the background knowledge. When a student sits down and they have to write about what's been done in their field, that's like this background knowledge in a story. So the first part of the scientific process is learning about what's been done. Second part is about the methods and the results, what you did on that. Or actually, we should say really the problem comes first. So then in a story, something happens in that upsets that world, and there's a problem. And that's the problem that you're working on in science. What's the issue that you're addressing? That's the thing that students often have to struggle with when they're doing that. What's my unique contribution going to be? What's unfinished in this field? Now, that's the problem. So in a story, that's the dragon appearing. Suddenly, in this peaceful village, suddenly there's a dragon, there's a problem, and it has to be addressed. And then there's the methods and the results, which is in a story, that's what, when the hero goes out, they sharpen the sword, they learn all the tools, They go out and they fight the dragon. That's all that work that the student has to do to obtain their results. After all of those things have been done, the student gets some results and conclusions. That is, he comes back or she comes back to the world, and that world is changed. That is, the knowledge that we had in previously has now been changed in some way through the new results that they have. We know something new that we didn't before. That's the hero coming back after fighting the dragon. The dragon has been slain. The world has changed. So that's the first thing. There's a perfect parallel. And so the students just have to put things into that parallel and realize that they're telling a story. And that brings with our second reason why it's so easy. Storytellers say our brains are wired for story. And I'm sure that that's true. We hear stories everywhere. And that story structure has been validated many different times. So by tapping into that story structure that your audience is going to hear very easily, it allows you to communicate very well with your audience. So the two reasons: one, story structure and the process of scientific discovery are exactly parallel. And two, people, that is your audience, have brains that are wired for story. They're wired to hear that structure. So use that structure, you'll communicate better.
How can we make scientific communication easier?
One is using that story structure and really helping them understand that what they're doing in science is telling a story, and they should be telling a story. And then it's just a matter of practicing. I just read a paper today which said we really need to help scientists have a growth mindset, or students to have a growth mindset about this. That don't expect perfection the first time. Just do something and then learn from it. It's like basketball. Learning to communicate science is like basketball or any sport. First time you get out there on the court, you're going to mess up. You're not going to do very well. And you go home and you don't give up. You go back the next day and you practice a little more. And you did a little better maybe, or maybe not too much better. And maybe it's about the same the second time. And you go home and you don't give up. And you go back and you do it again. And that's why we just got to do scientific communication. We somehow have the idea that, if I understand it, if I myself understand the material, if I've done all the work that I need to do for understand it myself, that means I'm going to be able to communicate it well. And that just is not true. If you understand it yourself, you've got to somehow be able to take your audience along on that process that you went through to understand it, which means you have to tell a story. And two, it means you just got to practice doing that over and over again. So you make it easier by just doing practice, by building it in to all the different courses that you do in the science. So you do a little bit all the time. It just becomes second nature to be able to do these kinds of presentations. It's like learning a language too. The new language learning tools, right? New language learning tools like Duolingo, they don't teach you grammar. You can read a little bit about grammar on the side, but there's none of those exercises are going to teach you how to the grammar. They're going to teach you how to speak the language, in which case you're going to internalize the grammar. And that's what we need to do with scientific communication. We need to do enough practice that we internalize all these processes. It's not head knowledge, it is practical knowledge that we need.
How did you come to write your book?
Well, the short answer is I was invited to write it. I was giving a workshop on scientific communication at the Botanical Society of America's annual meeting. The editor at my publisher at CABI approached me and said, would you like to write a book about this? We're looking to expand our offerings in scientific communication. So that's the very easy short answer. The harder answer is, why was I giving that workshop at the Botanical Society of America? And I think that came out of my teaching and my work with students in processes that were called writing across the curriculum. So in the early 90s, there was a program that was really nationwide. I mean, it's still out there, but it's declined a little bit. So my university has pulled back from it. But in the early 90s, everyone was on the board of doing writing and speaking across the curriculum. And so we were incorporating speaking courses across all of the different courses in the university. And so I started teaching those. I started learning how to teach students to speak well and to write well, but I'm going to emphasize speaking well now. And kind of out of that, I saw that it was possible to do this. It was not that hard to do it. You just had to do it in the right way that I've talked about already, by giving the students experiences, not by teaching them theory. And I started thinking, well, why can't I teach students to give better talks? I would often go to hear talks and they'd wander around and I couldn't understand them. Even in my field, I'd say, what am I supposed to get out of this talk? I don't know what the point is. I sometimes would hear comments in the audience also that other people, well, not just me, weren't understanding this talk. And so I said, well, why can't I use the same knowledge that I've gained through my teaching to teach scientists to communicate a little better? So I think that's what got me into teaching the workshops.
Why is scientific communication neglected in graduate curriculum?
Well, I think I said a minute ago, I just read a paper that suggested that people, scientists, and probably all academics confuse two things: understanding something and being able to communicate it. It's this confusion. We as academics think that when we understand something, that means we can communicate it. And that's just not true. That's an error in thought. We forget how hard it was for us to understand whatever it is we're working on, our field of biology, our field of physics, whatever area we're working on. We went through a lot to get to that understanding. And then we think we're just going to be able to tell someone very simply what we've come to without taking them through any kind of process. And so we have to find a way to take them through some kind of a process so that they can understand how we came to this real deep understanding that we have. And a story is a way to do that. Background knowledge: what problem do you have? How did you address the problem? You don't have to go into details about your methods, but kind of what you did. And then really importantly, what's the take-home message? What are the conclusions from this? How did the world change because of what you did? And by the world change, I mean, that could be a change in something that's important to society, but that could be a change that's, a little tiny thing in some obscure area of physics that really makes a difference in that area of physics, but no one else cares about. But still, you can't say what's going to happen in the future. So that little thing that seems completely irrelevant to most societal questions today might in the future become something really important. And so it is changing the world. Even working on something that's very obscure can change the world. We just have to find ways of telling our audience why it's important.
I really agree with that because a lot of times, like, we talk about things that are like, oh, like the PhD students, like, oh, I'm working on this thing that no one's ever heard of, and like it's so pointless. But then it like goes into like the Department of Defense research, or like something that's like completely so niche, but it actually has a very huge impact. But people don't learn to describe the impact. So then they also go around feeling like they don't do anything important when actually they just haven't thought about how important the thing is that they do, and they haven't explained it to anyone. So no one and their family, like a lot of people, my grad school classmates were like, I don't know what my family doesn't know what I'm doing. And my family knew what I was doing because I tried to explain it. I was all really big on explaining and writing, but I think that's a really important piece that is kind of missing. So last question for you. What is needed to get students to show up for science communication training? In other words, how do we get them to take it seriously?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I know, because I try to do trainings that are free. I really believe in free. And what I find when I offer a free training, even through scientific societies, is that 20% of the students show up at best. And then a part of those students leave before the end. And so you may get 4 or 5 students who really stay in through and do the exercises. So it's can be very discouraging to a trainer who's put a lot of effort in this. So, of course, one way around that is to charge, and to charge a lot for the workshop. And and people do that. And I'm not at this stage willing to do that, but I want to do free or very low cost workshops. But that's one way to do it. Now, you're going to get a smaller number of students, but I suppose you'll be compensated by the fact you can earn more money from that. So that isn't really a very good answer. That's kind of the superficial cop-out answer.
Well,
So what's right about that answer is that by paying a lot of money, if it comes out of the student's pocket, they have a commitment to what's happening. So what other ways could a student have a commitment to go to what happens in the workshop? And the way that I know is if their advisor tells them that they have to do this. And the advisor checks up on them afterwards, checks up on them beforehand, make sure they're going to go, checks up them afterwards and make sure that they went, ask them what they learned about it, expects to see a change in them, in their ability to present based on what happened in the workshop. In another sense, both of these answers are the student has to have some skin in the game. And if it's not financial skin, it's got to be status skin or status with their major professor. So then the question, of course, is how do we get academics to really require this of their students? And I think that's going to be a long process. We're just going to have to keep working on it and keep working on the people who care about this, and will send their students and demand some payback from the students, some response from the students. Maybe somebody who's listening to this will have a better idea, and they can make a comment in the chat below this and will tell us another way of doing this. But those are the two ways I've thought about.
Yeah, because there's a lot of interest in SciComm, I think, because a lot of students, I talked to this one person on Twitter a while back when it was still called Twitter. It was like, oh, the girl is a graduate student girl. She was like, I really want to do SciComm, but it's really cliquey. And I was like, it's really cliquey? Like, first of all, SciComm didn't exist when I was a grad student. Now I guess it exists, but it's like cliquey, and that the people that do it maybe are very openly obsessed with it or something. I could totally see that happening, but I don't think it needs to be cliquey. And I think there is a lot of interest there. And I think the impacts are very real for the person to feel better about their research, to know that their research really is important, relevant to the world. Because I really know so many people, especially like great places like MIT and Harvard, and they're just like, oh, back in the day when I worked back there in Cambridge, Boston, they were like, oh, what I'm doing is not important. And it's like, well, you work at MIT and Harvard, so clearly they are getting the big bucks too, or the same bucks as everyone, but still doing this really important research. But then you're like, I'm just a robot of doing nothing, which is like really insane to me. So, and I think so. I think that it could benefit graduate students a lot to just like get them to express themselves better, because in the real world, I don't know why people say academia is not the real world, but like outside of academia, just as inside of academia, communication makes a huge difference. And I worked in Capitol Hill, and when you go to Capitol Hill, everyone is very polished communicators. So I think scientists should also be able to communicate at that same level. So I'm a huge fan of your work and your free trainings, and I also believe that science communication training should be free for graduate students or easily accessible, because a lot of graduate students, they are really curious and they seek out opportunities. And I think that SciComm, even if it's not federally mandated in the training program itself, should be freely available for students to participate in. And we'll link to your free SciComm trainings. There's two that I know of. I forget, one is like posters, I forget what the other one is, but we'll link it for anyone
So,
that's watching this.
yeah, we'll put the links in the area below the video, but there's a couple things. So I've got two courses now, one on titles and one on writing an abstract. And those are on a free learning management site called Canvas. It's the free version of Canvas, and they're up there free. And also all the materials from those courses are available on Open Science Framework, so people can download the contents of the courses, and they can use them in their own courses. They can rearrange them any way they want. If they use Canvas on their classes, they can import parts of the courses into Canvas on their learning management system. If they're not on Canvas, they can still import parts of the courses into their own courses, so they can use those in any way they want. I've also got a YouTube channel, and again, that's all free. So I say it's not monetized, but I'm afraid that YouTube is going to show you videos, shows you ads anyway, but I'm not earning anything from that. Those are all out there and free.
That is great. And you're kind of my role model in science communication in terms of just getting science communication training out there for people to use. And your science communication has helped me communicate science better. And I'm a science communicator. So I really hope that everyone watching this will check out. I'll put all the links in the description box so everyone can check out those. Thank you so much for being on my YouTube. I can't believe I had the chance to talk to you. I'm really grateful for this conversation.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.